In January of 1951, Shoghi Effendi, the first guardian of the Baha'i cause, publicly announced what he called the weighty, epoch-making decision of the formation of the first stage of the Universal House of Justice, calling it the International Bahá'í Council. 2 months later, he publicly named the U.S.-American Charles Mason Remey as its president. This fulfilled two key provisions of the covenant. First, he appointed the general membership of the body, which he explained was to evolve through 4 discrete stages. Second, he appointed Mason Remey as its president. According to the will and testament, the head of that body is the guardian. So if the guardian is the head and Mason Remey was appointed as head, then it logically follows that this was Shoghi Effendi's appointment of the next guardian, fulfilling his duty under the covenant to designate his successor. But for this appointment to be valid under the terms of the will and testament, the guardian has to be an Aghsan, a male descendant of Bahá'u'lláh. And that's where adoption comes in. During the time of the Ottoman Empire, which governed Palestine during most of the life of Abdu'l-Bahá, adoption was not handled through secular courts. It was more of a religious custom established through a public declaration and the giving of a symbolic token. Later, under the British Mandate and then the government of Israel, religious customs dealing with family relations were recognized as legally binding. In multiple issues of the publication Star of the West, Abdu'l-Bahá referred to Mason Remey not only as my dear son, but as my real son. This wasn't just affectionate language, and it was not language that he casually tossed about. It was a serious public expression of a legal religious adoption. Although Abdu'l-Bahá passed away before giving the token, that token was delivered a few months later by his successor in the leadership of the faith, Shoghi Effendi. In March 1922, a few months after the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá, Shoghi Effendi sent Mason Remey a sealed envelope containing drops of Baha'u'llah's coagulated blood and ringlets of his hair. On the envelope, he wrote, "Presented as my most precious possession to Abdu'l-Bahā's dear son, Charles Mason Remey, as a token of my Baha'i affection and brotherly love." This act of acknowledging their father-son relationship in the context of passing along a symbolically meaningful token sealed the adoption. The blood signified the inheritance, the continuation of the Davidic line, and the hair represented Mason's intended future role as head of the Universal House of Justice. It fulfilled the ancient prophecy of Genesis 49:10, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come." The identity of Shiloh will be discussed in the chapter on the Baha'i establisher. The phrase "between his feet" is a Hebrew idiom for genetic lineage, passed through the male line. This verse foretells that kingship would remain within Judah's line until the arrival of Shiloh, after which it would no longer be passed by bloodline. That transition happened when Abdu'l-Bahá adopted Mason Remey, ending a strictly genetic lineage and inaugurating a new form of inheritance. But after Shoghi Effendi's sudden passing in 1957, the Baha'i world failed to understand what had already been put in place. The hands of the cause, despite lacking the authority of interpretation, claimed that no successor had been appointed. They assumed leadership and declared that the Universal House of Justice could be elected without a guardian. This violated the covenant. Mason Remey had already been adopted and appointed. He was alive. He had received the token. He had been publicly named to a position, presidency of the embryonic Universal House of Justice, that only the guardian could assume. Yet he was rejected. This was the great test. Would the believers stay loyal to the divine framework, or would they go along with a man-made scheme, crafted in the name of unity? In 1959, when the Hands declared they were going to replace the International Bahá'í Council, Mason Remey broke ranks. The next year, he publicly declared himself to be the second infallible guardian of the faith. And that was his mistake. He was correct that his appointment to the presidency of the IBC made him guardian of the cause. But he was never intended to succeed Shoghi Effendi in the same infallible capacity. That authority now belonged to the body as a whole, the embryonic Universal House of Justice with the guardian at its head. Mason Remey should have convened its first meeting. He should have activated the full body, executive and legislative, to carry out its God-given role. Instead, he claimed a personal infallibility that was never his to claim. In doing so, he fell into error, and his followers, though sincere, followed him into confusion. The line of guardianship did continue, but its role was to serve as head of the body, not as an independent authority. Those who truly understood the covenant eventually came to understand and recognize this distinction. In order to truly understand the significance of Mason Remey's adoption, we have to go back to ancient Israel, back to the royal line of David, and the divine promise that it would never be broken. In the next episode, we'll trace that promise from King David to Bahá'u'lláh. In the meantime, visit schooloftheland.com, where history's oldest promise meets humanity's future.